Ana.
Ka tira tēnā tātou. He kina mai ai te kawaki ngā tau mata ki runga rā, tēnei rā te ino kia koe au matua kore. Tūwhiringia mai naka tēnei tā mātou hui. Ki tātou ai ngā hua kei mua te au e māpara, hara ngā hua ta ngā katoa. Whakakotahi anō rā ngene ngā tira, ngā runga te kaupapa o te wā. Peki te ora ki runga mātou tīnana, kia ngātahi anō i tōna rere. Creator, bless everyone here today. Open the door, clear understanding, give us the strength to hear well, and not necessarily talk too fast. Tēnei ka ina anō i rungi o koutou i ngā mana, uhi, wero, tūmai te toki, haumi e, hui e. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Tēnā koe matua, and thank you for that reminder about talking fast, because I certainly tend to sometimes. Happy New Year, everybody. Yeah, yes. And I say that because this is the time of Matariki. It's actually a very auspicious time to be gathering together and having a wānanga about important matters, point one. Point two is because when you say Happy New Year, some people go, what? And it provokes people to think about our models of reality. You know, is it New Year? Is it not New Year? Is this something that can become a big campaign and transform Aotearoa? Or is it something else? You know, just provoke ourselves. It's a bit of work internally that we can each do, provoke ourselves to think. So kia ora, and welcome to the national launch of Tapatahi, Coalition for a People's Aotearoa. Woo! Yeah, I reckon that's big enough for a woo and an applause. Absolutely. Also, so my name is Catherine Murupaenga-Ikenn. I'm a member of Pathway to Survival and Te Waka Haurua, Māori climate justice activists and Tiriti allies. And I'll be your MC for this event today, which is being simultaneously coordinated across 3 locations, as I said, Tāmaki here, Auckland, also in Porirua, and then in Ōtautahi, Christchurch. And I've just realized I probably need my PowerPoint slides for the next part, which I have got on a USB stick, and I got totally distracted and didn't even bring them to you, Ben. But I can also just talk to them as well. So I'll put them on in the break. Yeah. So today we're privileged to have a fabulous lineup of speakers here and there, who I'll introduce them as they take the floor. And that will be followed by a panel discussion, and we're aiming to wind up around 5 o'clock. And are we able to stay a bit longer? We've got until 6. Awesome, cool, awesome, thank you. So that's our timing. But before I hand over to our first presenter, we'd like to give you a brief overview of Tapatahi's kaupapa and what we stand for. Okay. Oh, and by the way, you can go on and find more about Tapatahi on our website, www.tapatahi.nz, or Facebook or Instagram. So Tapatahi is an alliance of groups whose roots are in campaigning and advocating for a better, more just Aotearoa. We recognise that many have come before us, and there are many more groups like us who right now also struggle to address glaring socio-economic, environmental and political problems of our time. Inequality, poverty, environmental degradation, biodiversity destruction, climate crisis, colonialism and Tiriti injustice, the harms wrought by rampant capitalism and undemocratic corporate influence, entanglement in illegitimate conflicts and much more. In the face of accelerating instability and chaos in the world, Tapatahi is also a call to action for diverse groups from socio-economic, age, ethnic, cultural, and other backgrounds to mobilise around shared interests and priorities for rapid, transformative action towards a fairer Aotearoa. Now, there's much opinion about what action ought to be prioritised, and it's impossible to draft up a list that pleases everybody. But Tapatahi has agreed on 8 demands to put to our government. It's our list for now, which means depending on the situation over time, they could change. And I'm getting yeah. Demand number 1. Now this is interesting because we've got, I'm not sure if our timing is exactly on. What time is it now? Can I just ask? Oh, so we've taken a bit, yeah, okay. What I might do is just go through these anyway and we'll be able to make up as we go. Cool. So we've got 8 demands. Demand number 1, commit to constitutional transformation and doing democracy better. And this includes immediately start the process for the national conversations that Mātike Mai Aotearoa in 2016 recommended, and trial to Tiriti-based citizens' assemblies to deal with key questions that are facing us. Demand number 2, end poverty, disparity, and income insecurity. And we can find out more about these demands online. But it includes free dental care, free transport, and so on. Demand number 3, solve the housing crisis. And we've got a lot of ideas around how to do that. Some relates to taxation and providing adequate funding for state housing and so on. Demand number 4, tax the richest to ensure income security for all. Demand number 5, real environmental action. There's a lot that could be said there. We all know the usual suspects around fossil fuels and stuff, but also in the food sector. We've heard a lot about regenerative and restorative agriculture, for example. Demand number 6, jobs that support everybody's welfare, not endless growth in corporate profits. That's a big one as well. Demand number 7, justice reforms as recommended by the Safe and Effective Justice Advocacy Group. And last but not least, demand number 8, oppose militarization of the Pacific. Yes, absolutely. So that's the overview. Number 4 was about tax the richest. So there's a whole lot that can be done there. Tax the rich. Yeah, so that's our overview of what Tapatahi is, our demands and such. We're putting these to politicians this election year, okay? But of course, there's more to be done beyond the election. So we're really keen to know from citizens, people, what we should be doing beyond the election, okay? And of course, we need to do this by working together. So with that overview, we want to turn to our main event. And our first speaker, and what we've done is we've invited our speakers to, from their particular perspectives, with all the value that they bring to the table, we're asking them to just give their perspectives on one or more of the demands that Tapatahi has. First up is independent researcher, Dr. Arama Rata. Arama is Ngā Ruahine, Taranaki, and Ngāti Maniapoto. She completed a PhD in psychology in 2012, and she went on to lecture at Te Kaua a Māui, the School of Māori Studies. She's done research that's covered numerous situations impacting Māori, including Māori health, Indigenous identity, Māori and rural communities, racism, and inequality. Currently, Arama is the lead researcher for Wero, working to end racial oppression. And there's a theme that she's working under, intergroup relations. So we've invited Dr. Rata to comment on Tapatahi's demand number 1, commit to constitutional transformation and doing democracy better. So please welcome Dr. Arama Rata.
Tēnā tātou. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Matua for our Karakia, and thank you for the promotion as well. I'm now the lead of Weddle. That's nice. I'm not the lead. That's Waikari Moana Waitoki. I am, however, part of that project. So I thought I'd begin just by telling you why I'm here. So I'm not here to represent Tapatahi. I'm not here because I believe that electoral politics is going to get us anywhere. I'm here because while I was born in Auckland, at a time that I've heard you, Sue, describe as the closest we've come to civil war in modern times, and that being when the Springboks were attempting to tour the country. So a very, very volatile time, a very violent time, and things have only got worse, much, much worse since I've been alive. It's not my fault, but it's just a coincidence. So we we all know that, and that's I'm sure why we're here, that there's been a massive war on the poor, that the social safety net that used to exist is now a tightrope, that there's been massive transfer of wealth from the people to corporate elites. And we know that they've attempted to try to fix this through financialization, through skimming surplus value, through when capital is transferred, and gambling on the fictitious economy. So all of these means to keep the wheel of capitalism turning that are just getting us closer and closer to a complete crisis of capitalism. So we know that's why we're here. And the ways in which people are attempting to keep capitalism going are extremely violent. So we've got the ramping up of the carceral state, of police militarism, the externalizing of the problem, so blaming those most exploited through capitalism, whether that be internally, so blaming like racialized folks, trans folks, for example, or externalizing the problems overseas and advocating for perpetual war. And so as we see capitalism struggling, we also see the rise of fascism. And I think it's important to be like precise when we're using these terms. A lot of people kind of think that capitalism is that fascism, hey, that was a good slip, that fascism is about ideologies and it's about racism or something. Well, it may be about racism, but it might not be as well. So the core features of fascism that I want to reiterate is that it's about capitalism trying to reinstall these exploitative relations, right? These exploitative social relations. So it's about movements that are pro-capital and anti-worker, anti-socialist. They're often anti-elite, which can be like really confusing because sometimes you'll look at a movement and it'll say, you know, we're against there being billionaires. And so we think that's a movement is about us, but it's not. These movements particularly target the lower middle class and the underclass. So people who are kind of excluded entirely from society, for example, like long-term unemployed people, and they punch down. So they always re-entrench existing inequality, and they include parastate violence. So when we see groups like Destiny Church, for example, we have to be clear that what we're dealing with are fascists, even though they might talk about tino rangatiratanga, they might talk about Māori identity, they may even do good work, but so did the Nazi Party, right? So we have to be very, very clear about looking at what these different movements are and actually the revolutionary force and the counter-revolutionary components of all the movements that we come across. We have to be analyzing that. And that kind of brings me to what I wanted to talk about, which is the need to rise up against fascism. So we all have to be anti-fascist. We have to build power. We have to build power quickly, which is why I'm here, because I see Tapatahi as a coalition that is attempting to do that. And, you know, we have to, it's very tempting for people who call themselves leftists or Marxists or intellectuals or academics, whatever the label might be, to wait for a perfect movement. Wait for a movement that can't be critiqued. It's very easy to stand apart from a movement and condemn it, right? What's more difficult is to actually get involved and make change. So that the role of all of us, if we're here, it's because we have a sense of what's going on. Of course, it's not enough just to know what the problem is. We have to take action, and we have to meet people where they're at, and we have to describe the social conditions in order to change them, not just to be correct, but in order to actually change them. And that requires actually making relationships with people, building bonds and strengthening our movements. But it's also not enough just to condone everything, to condone every movement that we see. And what I'm saying there is we need to not let our ideology be shaped by how many likes we get for posting things, or by how many people agree with us, because that's populism, right? If that's how you build your brand on social media, then fuck off out of the left. Go join a populist party instead of co-opting our movements. We have to recognize, as I say, the revolutionary and the counter-revolutionary aspects of all movements. And this brings me to something that's still very contentious today, which is the Parliament protest. The Parliament protest, which I think people are still very divided on. And there's a reason why we're divided on it, is because you can't describe it as one thing. There was a lot of things happening there. There were blatantly fascist elements there, and there were people there that had genuine concerns, who felt very victimized by capitalism, really. And also by, there are some parts of the way in which the government responded to COVID that we can critique, right? We're allowed to critique what the government does. We all do. And, Māori, I think, have come forward on quite a lot of points and critiqued, for example, the vaccine rollout. So we should be able to critique these things. And I don't think that either side of the debate have been very good at actually listening to each other in a lot of ways. But at the same time, we can't stand with Brian Tāmaki. We can't stand with Action Zealandia, right? So we can't condone the Parliament protest. We can be compassionate about it. We can address the hurt that people there face. Absolutely, our movement should address the hurt that people face that brought them to that movement. But at the same time, we don't need to go so far as to condone the protest. Fuck the protest. Fuck Brian Tāmaki. Fuck Destiny Church. Fuck their whole coalition. And that actually brings me finally to what I was asked to talk about today, which is matike mai. Matike mai. So when you have a movement, it's always good to have a plan, right? A plan in place so that you know what you're actually working for, working towards. And for us, that's matike mai. A brilliant plan, a brilliant map that we have. But we need to recognize the counter-revolutionary potential of matike mai as well. And that is that people can co-opt it, can water it down, can make it something that it's not. And we've kind of been doing a little bit of work with my friend Simon Barber, who's been talking about the example of the Chilean attempt for constitutional transformation. And what they saw there was their movement for constitutional transformation got co-opted by elites, and that's why it failed. And so when we make a demand, like we are in Tapatahi, we're not asking government to take it over. And we need to be very clear about what matike mai is. So please read it if you haven't. It's not about reform, it's about transformation. We need to ensure that we're really pushing what we're asking for. So at the moment, the wording is around the recommendations in matike mai, which are really old now and actually not very challenging. They're just like, have a meeting, sure, They were just some basic next steps, basically. And so we could look to things like he puapua, which has some more kind kind of stronger actions and pathways forward and push for those. But we should never allow, like the Māori Party, for example, have it in their, I think they have like some items around their policy on matiki mai is, you know, but we're not going to give it to a party like the Māori Party to do it because they're part of that parliamentary system, nothing against the Māori Party. But I'm just suggesting that we don't give it to elites. We need to ensure that it doesn't get co-opted. And if you're not talking about what it says in matiki mai, don't use the words. Just let others lead it if that's where you're at. And that's all I've got to say. Kia ora.
Awesome, thank you. You know, and what you said about fascists reminds me of a statement that I've seen around quite a bit lately. I don't fight fascists because I think I will win. I fight fascists because they are fascists. So take from that what you will, good people. Thank you very much. So our next speaker needs no introduction from any of us, but Sue Bradford. Your name is actually synonymous with social justice activism in my book, anyway. And especially in the heady days of the 80s and 90s, for those of you who know anything about Sue's great work. She became notable for her staunch activism criticising various government social and economic reforms back in those days. A history and political studies graduate of Auckland University, she later completed a diploma in journalism at the University of Canterbury. And she received in 2015 a PhD in public policy. Her doctoral thesis was a major left-wing think tank in Aotearoa, an impossible dream or a call to action. She's also had a life in politics, many of you may know, including with the New Labour Party and the Green Party. And may I say, she was awarded the New Zealand Herald's Backbencher of the Year in 2000. Now, to get that award, in my imaginings, you need to be pretty hardworking and pretty tough and staunch at what you're doing. So we thank you, Sue, for that. We've invited Dr. Bradford to present on two interconnected Tapatahi demands. Demand 2, end poverty, disparity and income security. And demand 6, jobs that support everybody's welfare, not endless growth in corporate profits. So, Sue, handing over.
Is it okay to stand here? Kia ora koutou, e mihi nui ana o kia koutou. It's great to be here and to see some very old friends who were out on the streets with me way back when, and new friends and people of different generations. It's great to have you here. I would just like to make a disclaimer too that I haven't been directly involved with Tapatahi, so I'm coming in a little bit from outside, but totally supporting any initiative like this, which aims to try and bring those of us which I would loosely call on the radical left, more together, because boy, have we got a big gap there. So kia ora to everyone involved in organising this today. I've been asked to talk about poverty, incomes and jobs, although I'd be the first to say that they can't be disconnected from anything else on the agenda, which of course is what Arama's already pointed out. We live in a capitalist, colonialist society facing down a climate and ecological crisis, which is accelerating and inescapable. The gap between those who have way more than enough, the economic elite, and those who have nothing has grown and deepened over the last 4 decades. As we used to proclaim through many street actions in the early days of Auckland Action Against Poverty, there is a deliberate war on the poor, which must be exposed, opposed and ended as soon as possible. Without serious redistribution of wealth and power from those who have more than enough to those who have least, change is not going to happen. In the area of welfare and jobs, one demand on the Tapatahi list stands out for me. Tax the richest to ensure income security for everybody. Any talk of jobs and incomes, whether we're in or out of work, can't be separated from how and whom we tax. just as housing inadequacy and homelessness can't be isolated from all the other realities for low and no income people. I was probably as surprised as some of you were, and I know we're not supposed to be really talking about the parliamentary parties at the moment, but I was surprised when the Green Party came out with its new income guarantee policy a couple of weeks back. In guaranteeing that no one's income will fall below a certain amount, $385 and, for example, $770 for a sole parent, this proposition is a big step forward on anything we've seen in the parliamentary arena, at least that I can remember, especially as the scheme recognises the necessity of increased wealth taxes as well as a completely transformed ACC system, which is long overdue. In some respects, this unexpectedly radical policy from the Greens builds on what the Welfare Expert Advisory Group did with its recommendations back in 2019, one of the key Tapatahi calls. My own view, and that of the unemployed and beneficiary groups I've been part of in the past, is, however, that we should look beyond the WEAG, the Welfare Expert Advisory Group report. The whole welfare system should be scrapped rather than just played around with. Generations of Labour and National-led governments have added layer after layer of nitpicking punitive sanctions and nourished a culture of shame and blame, which creates often intense trauma for those who have experienced life at work and income, as I'm sure many in this meeting have. The Welfare Expert Advisory Group did a really good job of picking this apart and putting up a large number of suggestions. But ultimately, I believe it would be better to go a step further and create a totally new regime based on principles of simplicity, universality and respect, backed by the total reform of the tax system. A progressive basic income, as I define it, would be set as a big part of the answer here, and would be set at a level high enough to allow people to live with dignity, perhaps at the same rate as super, with add-ons for children, disability and accommodation. Adults should receive payments in their own right. We shouldn't be judged and paid and receive income because of the relationship we're in or not. Another insignificant aspect of a move to basic income is that all the unpaid work we do in our homes, on the marae, in our communities, would be valued in a way which helps put food on the table and helps pay the rent, rather than being invisibilised and demeaned in comparison to paid work. A basic income would also enable a flowering of creativity at a time when our need for artists, musicians, writers and other folks in the creative world, we need you more than ever. I've heard the argument put by some on the left that we should basically forget about the call for basic income for now and push for universal basic services instead. I think this is a totally false equation, as both are needed, and both are the kind of fundamental challenge to the neoliberal capitalist state that we should be pushing for. One doesn't replace the other. What's left of public good and public commons must be defended, and there is no rational argument for saying our movements can't support a basic income alongside demands like free dental care, free public transport, affordable secure housing and the rest. I think perhaps the main reason that a number of people on the left do shy away from basic income these days is that there is no clear movement championing a clearly progressive form of basic income in Aotearoa. And I also believe that in any case, moving towards basic income will only happen when it's intrinsically part of a wider movement which takes on board radical changes in the way we tax and the way in which we deal with work and employment. It was great to see the ministry, the call for a Ministry of Green Works on the list of Tapatahi demands, at least that was put out on the Action Station website. Pulling housing and other infrastructure needs into a seriously resourced and environmentally focused government department would be a big step forward, not only in meeting demands of housing and ecological crises, but also in acting as a clear pipeline for the training and development of workers in those sectors. While for years now governments have been acting as if the unemployment rate is nil, it's actually even now 3.4%. That means over 100,000 people who would like to have jobs and don't have them. There was a time when people saw 100,000 people out of work as a serious problem. These days it's blithely accepted. alongside an underemployment rate of nearly 10%. That's people who don't have the amount of paid work they want and need. What such stats hide is the fact that many of those counted as unemployed are from disproportionately disadvantaged backgrounds, for example, Māori and Pacifica peoples, people with disability and sickness, sole parents, and the younger and old people at the older and younger ends of the age spectrum. I have to admit that the Tapatahi demand for 4 days work for 5 days pay is a little bit of a distraction right now from where I sit, when there are such existing massive inequities in who gets paid what in the current workforce, and the number of people in precarious and insecure jobs, how many people are still unemployed. And when one of the biggest problems is actually that of overwork, the boss is expecting you to do too much all the time. The 4-day week is complex and doesn't get to the heart of things. Just my personal opinion. Not that it's not a great goal. It's just in terms of prioritisation at this moment in history. If any movement of movements or new grouping on the left comes together, I think we need to put more of a focus on educating ourselves and others about the value of unions, with kia ora to all unionists here today. Unionised workers are better off and have better conditions, there's no doubt. Organised labour is one of the only places left where counterpower to capital can be sustained and mobilised, and at least some of this remains here, even after decades of deliberate deunionisation. While public sector workers are relatively privileged, and that's relatively, they are certainly well unionised in the Post-Employment Contracts Act era, compared to those who work in the private sector, where often employers actually deliberately try and stop people from joining unions, and where coverage is often sparse or unavailable. The destructive legislation of the 90s has struck deep into private sector unions themselves. The neoliberal capitalist culture in which we all live, whether we like it or not, has also undermined workers' understanding of the need for unions. Alongside this, many, even amongst our friends, sometimes don't know how hard it is to organise, and particularly in relation to the private sector. I think work needs to be done on improving perceptions of the role of unions, including shifting from the idea of empowering others, with apologies to some here, and leaving it to those mysterious others to take leadership, to the concept of taking responsibility ourselves for working with others, to organise and build powerful collective forces for change. Beyond and alongside unions, there needs to be political formations that are coherent across intersectoral lines, economic, social, ecological and te tiriti grounded. This is about power and building power in real life organisations in real time, not simply online. Kia ora for what you were saying about that. There are values around unity that I think we on the left need to learn and relearn. We need to understand what other dedicated people in organisations, and even just looking around this room here, understand what our friends are on about, what their kaupapa is, before we leap into attacks on them for being less than perfect, for not being pure in some way. At the same time, it is imperative that we expose and acknowledge contradictions between each other and find ways to discuss these differences between ourselves constructively and build organisations for the future that are capable of doing that and holding that. I'm hopeful that our time together today may be a small stepping stone in this direction, but thanks again to everyone who was helping to organise this. Kia kaha, kia manawa nui, kia mo.
Arts are highly underutilised in civic work, and it would be really great. I mean, if there was a comedy club that, you know, because comedy moves people in big ways. I don't know if anyone here looks at comedy for very radical narratives and, you know, raising awareness of people. So thank you very much, Sue. And our next speaker actually is coming from Ōtautahi, I believe. John Minto. John was, I don't know if people know this, John apparently was recognised in 2005 as one of New Zealand's top 100 history makers. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. He's a contemporary of Sue's, obviously, another iconic political activist in Aotearoa, known for his involvement in various social justice groups and causes, most notably the Halt All Racist tours. Remember the apartheid and the 1981 Springbok, all that, John. And he's also very big in the education field. He's a strong advocate for quality education. He retired from teaching in 2018 and is a long-time member of the Post-Primary Teachers Association. So talking about unions and such, again, thank you, John, for all the work you do there. John, we've invited you to present on 2 interconnected Tapatahi demands. Demand 3, solve the housing crisis, and demand 4, tax the richest to ensure income security for everyone. So the floor is yours, John. Kia ora.
Kia ora. And thank you very much for that lovely welcome and that lovely introduction. I really appreciate that. Enga mana, enga reo, enga tangata whenua o Aotearoa, enga iwi o te motu, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Yeah, greetings everybody. So I've got 10 minutes to cover the housing crisis and taxation. So I can tell you that it's actually quite easy to do because the problem is very simple and the solutions are very simple. So I'm going to kick off with housing, and I want to focus very much on state housing because we've got a state housing waiting list of 24,000. And if we were able to get those people into state houses, it would reduce, it would take the pressure off the private housing market, and we'd have lower rents in any case. So it seems to me the state house waiting list is like the canary in the coal mine. I know that's an old metaphor, but it's an accurate one. When Labor came to power in 2017, the state house waiting list was just over 5,000. It is now over 24,000. And it's not because Labor has changed the criteria to get onto the list. A lot of people think that. They think, oh, Labor just made it easier for people to get on the list. National was really tough. National was tough. They slashed the state house waiting list in half when they came in, but Labor did not change the criteria to get on the list. Labor has taken that list from just over 5,000 to 24,000 all by themselves. It's going in the wrong direction. And the of those 24,000, 50% of the people are Māori. That's Māori families, right? You can only get on the state house waiting list if you have persistent and ongoing serious housing needs, right? It's very tough criteria to get on, but we've got that number at 24,000. It looked a couple of, maybe a year ago, like it had peaked and it was dropping down again, and it shot up again. That number is going to increase because we're bringing in a whole lot more people from overseas, more pressure on housing, and so rents will go up, and it will be more, housing will be less affordable for people on low incomes. So what has Labor done in response to that, right? Over the last 5.5 years. Over that last 5.5 years, the net increase in state houses each year has been 1,100. 1,100 for 24,000 people in desperate housing need. We get these government, these government media releases from our Minister, Megan Woods, and honestly, they've been, the only thing you ask yourself is how many PR consultants prepared this media release, because they are pure fantasy. They have talk figures and figures and figures, and you say, oh, we're building more than ever been built before, blah. They don't tell you about how many houses that they are demolishing. They are simply, you've got to look at the figures, 1,100 per year increase. They have increased funding for social housing providers, and they've increased funding for Māori housing. That's Pokaia housing, where Māori housing is built on Māori land. But if you look at those figures, like Māori housing, for example, the I think $424 million spread over 3 years. Every $1 million will get you 2 houses, right? So we're looking at something which is, you know, we're sort of around the margin of error here. The government is not serious about addressing this issue. And I think the reason is that Labor's focus has gone on to middle-class landlords, because there are now a lot of middle-class landlords. And Labor's priority is to look after the middle-class landlords rather than to get rid of this market madness in housing. So where are we now? In 1990, we had 5.5% of the total housing in New Zealand was state housing. 5.5%. That has dropped down now to 3.6%. Okay, New Zealand, we should have double the number of state houses which we have at the moment to bring it back up to what it was in 1990. But Labor has kept its policy is to keep the total number of state houses at that 3.6%. That's their policy, to keep it at 3.6%. Labor has no interest in addressing this massive housing crisis we have for families on low incomes. And anywhere in the world, no matter where you go, there is no private sector provider of housing which is warm, dry, and affordable for people on low incomes. It never happens anywhere in the world, ever. It must be provided by the state. The state is the only organisation that has the resources and the capacity to address this problem. And we are not having it addressed at the moment. So I don't want to, I've made a comment before about social housing providers. They do a really good job, right? They do a really good job. There's really good people working in the social housing sector. And there's really good things happening on marae around the country with regard to housing. But they are small drips in the bucket compared to what is needed. So the solution, as I said before, only the government has the capacity and the resources able to deal with the housing crisis. The private sector can't and won't and never will. All our housing resources for building now, most of it is going into building large houses on small properties where the property developer can maximize the return for the property developer, right? We're not building houses for affordable houses for people on lower incomes. So I think we need a standalone builder of state housing owned by the government. We've talked about this in quite a few sectors. You know, the Ministry of having a Ministry of Green Works is how it's been described in some places. The government should set up a government department to do the job, right? The way we used to do it with the Ministry of Works. The government employs the builders, employs the architects, employs all of that, and uses economies of scale to drive down the prices of those houses. We've done it before, we can do it again. In the late 1930s, we were building 3,500 state houses per year. If we were building at the same rate now, we'd be building 11,000 or 12,000 houses a year. And what are we getting? We're getting 1,100 net increase each year. It's simply, the government is simply not taking it seriously. And that's part of this New Zealand, the sort of separation, New Zealand coming apart at the seams, where the people on low incomes is just exploding. Poverty's exploded here in New Zealand. And the only way poverty reduces is when the government shifts the goalposts and says, oh, well, now this is the new goalpost. We're just not dealing with the problem. So I think it's a very simple solution. It's not one that is difficult to implement. It just means the government stepping right into the middle of the market and saying, this is what's going to happen. Let the private sector do what they want to do. That's fine. But we are doing this, and get on with it. So I don't know if that was 5 minutes. It probably was a bit more. So taxation. We'll do it quicker on taxation. You know, forever we have known that people on low incomes pay a higher tax rate than anybody else. People on the lowest incomes pay the highest tax rates, higher than anyone else. And that's because of GST, right? GST is now a massive part of the tax system. $26 billion a year comes in from GST. We never used to have GST until Labor brought it in the 1980s. Never used to have it. And if you're in the lowest income, 10% of New Zealanders, the lowest income, you pay 14% of your total income on GST. If you're in the top 5%, sorry, the top 10% of income earners, you pay less than 5% of your income on GST. It is a what's called a regressive tax. It works in the wrong direction. And I'm part of a coalition called EQ Action, and here in Ōtautahi, and we've come up with our tax proposal to get rid of GST altogether. Just get rid of it. You never had it. We never wanted it. We never voted for it. Get rid of it, right? And if we do that, we've got to find ways to bring in that extra $25 billion. And what we're proposing are a financial transactions tax, a wealth tax, and a capital acquisitions tax, which is a little bit like the old death duties. We should not allow families to build up massive amounts of unearned wealth, generation after generation, at the expense of people struggling with housing, with just the basics of life. So the diagnosis of the problem is very simple, and the solution is very simple. We can, we should, we must deal with these taxes. The other one I'll just relate, the empty homes tax, which I think is mentioned here. These are the sorts of things New Zealand should have in place. We have over 100,000 empty homes in New Zealand, over 100,000. And what they did in Vancouver, they said, right, if you've got a house and you are not renting it out for more than, if it's not rented out for more than 9 months of the year, we are going to tax you at 1% of the capital value of your property, right? And the only exceptions were if you were renovating your house, you know, you had, provided you didn't try and renovate it over 10 years. If you renovated your house, then you would be exempt in a year that you were renovating it. The idea was not actually to collect tax. The idea was to force landlords to rent these homes, because these homes were built by the community for the community in a broader sense. They should be there and able to be inhabited by people now. So these are all very simple solutions. But we've got to have a government that's prepared to step on the toes of middle-class landlords and deal to the problem that the rest of the community faces. Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for listening.
Kia ora. What an excellent overview. And, you know, I'm reminded of something that you said around, you know, equitable wealth distribution and such. Someone once said, living on a finite planet with finite resources, to the extent that you are amassing more wealth than it takes to live a basic, dignified life, you're actually stealing off everyone else. Just saying. That's, you know, that gives us something to ponder. So thank you very much. And our next speaker is Dr. Mike Joy, there in Porirua. For 2 decades, Dr. Joy has been an outspoken environmental defender. Among his work at the interface of science and policy, he's perhaps best known for his research and advocacy in the field of freshwater protection. He completed a PhD in ecology from Massey University and began lecturing there in ecology and environmental science in 2003. Also, a warm congratulations, Dr. Joy, on your recent appointment as Senior Research Fellow at the Morgan Foundation in Freshwater Ecology at the university. It's the very least they could do. Along with many awards which are testimony to your efforts, are accolades from the New Zealand Ecological Society, Forest and Bird, the Morgan Foundation. And this one struck me, the recipient of the Universities New Zealand's Critic and Conscience of Society Award. So that tells us something. Yeah, I reckon it deserves a bit of an applause. So we've invited Dr. Joy to present on Tapatahi's demand number 5, real environmental action. You're going to shove that all into 10 minutes. We're going to be enthused and enthralled by your ability to do that. So thank you, Dr. Joy.
Good. Thanks very much. And I just want to say how honoured I am to be speaking alongside John and these other wahine tawa. So I'm going to do the lazy lecturer thing and share a screen and use my PowerPoint slides. And I wasn't part of this of Tapatahi, and this is all new to me, and I wasn't really told what I was going to talk about. So apologies if I don't quite fit in with my with that introduction that I got. But what I want to do is really talk about reality. We're living in a world where there's not very much reality happening at the moment, and so I'm going to try and cover that. You just talked about that we're on a finite planet. This picture here of Earth from Mars, if you can make it out, that tiny dot there, that shows that reality that we live in, that we are just this tiny dot in this universe. And anyone who believes that indefinite growth of anything on a physically finite planet is either a madman or an economist, and it's economists that I seem to be running up against lately. Okay, so I want to talk about the fact that climate change whoops, sorry, I've just had a raider come into my office here. It's not a problem that we can fix. It's actually a situation that is a symptom of overshoot, and there are a whole bunch of other things that are symptoms of us overshooting these ecological boundaries. So there's a list of a whole bunch of the things that are totally related. The cool thing is, I guess, that if there is something positive about this, it's that the solutions are the same for most of these problems. They're all symptoms of overshoot, so we can fix them. And the multiple crises show up as material, social, ecological, energy, and financial. The things that the other speakers have been talking about tonight are actually related to climate change and its causes, and this kind of fossil fuel-driven overshoot that we're in at the moment. And what doesn't make the news, unfortunately, and is probably part of the reason that nothing happens, is we have things like this, the scientists' warning, where all of these limits are being breached, and scientists are getting really frustrated with the lack of action and the lack of understanding, and getting really, really noisy about it. And coming out with statements like this, if we don't act soon, there'll be catastrophic biodiversity loss and untold amounts of human misery. All of these graphs showing how bad they are, and this kind of language that's coming now from scientists, which just shows the incredible frustration that they're feeling. We have known since the 70s, this little graph here was done by a bunch of young scientists back in 1972, the limits to growth. And you can see that we're right at the inflection point for a whole bunch of these things. And I think that's the symptoms that we're seeing, the global change that's happening at the moment. And those solid parts of the line that are in the grayed out space there shows reality. The dotted lines are what the models said would happen under the scenario of business as usual. And we have had business as usual, which is just massive growth. And you can see how accurate these models have been. And they've been updated right to 2030, and they're bang on track. So we have this massive change coming. We keep hearing about this kind of magic future that we're going to have. There's just endless, I guess, promotion and this kind of built up idea that we have this magic alternative to fossil fuels. But we have to realize that we've had this incredible party, and we live, not all of us, but the wealthy parts of the world live this amazingly privileged lifestyle that is a one-off legacy of fossil fuels. And if you look at that graph that just shows there, I'm just trying to show all these energy sources that we have. And they're just plotted for this is energy density. It's how much energy they have per weight or per volume. And there's a whole bunch of them together up the top there that are the things that we use in transport at the moment. And then look right down on the bottom left-hand corner there, and there are batteries. And so the kind of energy systems that we have at the moment, we can get away with it with cars, but we will never get away with it with aircraft. And up there amongst those transport fuels that are non-fossil fuel are things like biodiesel and vegetable oil. But I wanted to put some reality around them, and that is the fact that the energy return on investment of these options is zero. So this is just a little picture here of the energy that leopard invests in catching that prey has to be positive. If he spends all day running and never catches anything, it will use up all his energy and won't survive. And it's the key to understanding life on the planet. And what's happening is that the energy return on investment for things like those biofuels is basically zero. You put as much energy into getting them and growing them and using all that land and processing them as you get back from them. So you may as well not have bothered in the first place. So they're kind of fake options, and there's so many of these fake options. And what the reality is that everything that we use, the energy return on investment is declining on it. So when you find something new, the energy return on investment is high, and then as you deplete it, it goes down. And the reverse happens when we're talking about the materials that we need for this non-carbon future. So the pyramid there on the left is the energy return on investment for oil, and it's going down. We have to put more and more energy into getting less and less energy back from fossil fuels. And on the other side of the example of materials like copper, this electrification of the world that we're thinking about is going to require copper, for example. And you can see how once you get the easy stuff, then you have to process more and more material. You have to dig more and more up to get the same amount of return back again. And so these things act in tandem to mean that the magic future that we're talking about with energy isn't going to happen. And the graph down the bottom that you may have seen just ticking away there, all it's showing is that when it comes to economies, the more and more energy we have to put into getting energy, the less and less discretionary energy or discretionary income there is. So all these things work together to make this kind of magic future not possible. And I want to point out that not many people are aware of this, but for example, here in New Zealand, despite all of the wind turbines and solar panels and everything that you see happening around us, we have proportionally no more renewable energy in our mix than we had back in 1990 and actually way before that, but we've got records back to 1990. And it's the same globally. Proportionally, we are not winning. As fast as we add renewable, we add consumption. More and more gadgets, using more and more electricity, and so we are not winning this battle at all. And then you have to think, and this is a shocking discovery for me, that if we discovered some magic fuel that was going to power our lifestyles, but it had no impact whatsoever, would we be better off? No, we wouldn't, because it's that availability of energy, that cheap energy that we got from fossil fuels that has enabled us to destroy the oceans, destroy the forests, to do all of the harm that we're doing. The only future we have is less consumption and less energy consumption. And so I just wanted to kind of just quickly, I haven't got long, I know, but just talk about these boxes here are basically relative to the size of the energy resources that we have at the moment. So this big one is oil, then gas and coal, and then some of it goes to energy, some of it goes to electricity. But we can't use these, right? This is the future without these things, or we won't have a future. And then we have these things. So hydro, we've pretty much dammed all the rivers that we could, and there are massive impacts from that. Nuclear is very expensive, very slow, and it has massive waste issues as well. We've got wind, it's there. We will have this in the future, but we just cannot even imagine or even try to think that we can live like we do at the moment with renewable energy, because if we try to do that, if we try to replace what we have currently in the way of energy consumption and infrastructure, we will just destroy the planet even faster trying to get there. So we have to figure out how to live without all of this stuff that we've taken. And the other thing to remember is that all of these options are dependent on fossil fuels as well. We need to understand, this is really crucial, because our policy for this government for the future is net zero. Net zero, their options are just to offset by planting trees or other things like that. We need to get the reality that planting trees does not offset fossil carbon. The trees are wonderful. I love trees, but there is a dangerous tree. The most dangerous tree in the world is a tree that's planted so that we can carry on burning fossil fuels, like offsetting for flying or whatever. Trees are in the current, they sequester carbon in the current carbon cycle. They do not mitigate fossil carbon. We could plant the whole planet in trees, and all we would do is just put off the reality for 7 to 9 years, and then we have to face it. So we've got to forget that net zero. It's just a complete self-delusion. We have to forget green growth, because green growth, I mean, if you mean green growth like we've been talking about in growth of greenhouses and that kind of thing, then great, but not green growth. Any kind of growth where we grow consumption, then we cannot do that. Forget all the magic that's being promoted out there, including carbon capture and storage. It's conning people into believing that there is an option that doesn't exist, and that's dangerous, because it means we don't get on with doing the real things. We need to understand that economic growth, or the growth paradigm that we grow up in, must end. Here's the plot. Look, it's just so simple. GDP is all about burning fossil fuels, so CO2 and world GDP in that left graph, then GDP and energy consumption in the next graph, and then GDP and extraction of raw materials, and the ecological footprint and GDP are just so tightly. We just have to understand that economic growth is destroying the planet, and we are doing a great job of it here in New Zealand. I think I've run out of time. I'm not going to talk about solutions, because there aren't solutions to a predicament. It's a realization that we've overshot, and that we must live within the biophysical limits on this planet, and that means really simplifying our lives, consuming way less, and realizing that how we live now is radical, not the change that we need to make is not radical, and that the much simpler life without all of this junk that we're talking about can be actually a much happier place to be than this kind of high pressure world that we live in the moment. Okay, I'll shut up and end there. Thank you.
Kia ora, Dr. Joy, that was excellent, you know, and I think of, I'm in two minds about infinite growth myself. I think there can be infinite growth of all those things in the marketplace that cannot be priced, like tika pono and aroha. Those things you can have infinite growth in. That other thing, yeah, probably not. So it's all about definitions, so thank you. So our final speaker today, we have Samah Huriwai-Seger. Now, Samah is of, and I hope I pronounce this all right, Mandaean Iraqi descent. Kia ora. Immigrated to Aotearoa. When was that? Did you immigrate here? 25 years ago. Yeah, real Kiwi. Right and true. So Samah is co-founder of the Aotearoa Liberation League. That was in 2021. And consistent with her parents' influential teachings about justice and peace, the League advocates for the dismantling of oppressive systems and collective justice through decolonial action. And with your better half, which is the better half, yeah, Pere and Samah together produce hard-hitting social media content on a range of social justice issues, including the impact of colonization, their land, Māori land, water, and the environment, to Tiriti justice, racism, misogyny, animal rights, you name it. They've put something out there that has provoked us to think. And also, last but not least, the full-length feature documentary Milked. If anyone has seen it, it's fabulous. If you haven't, I suggest you go out and do it before you buy your next bottle of milk, because you might be shocked, or you might not. So we've invited Pere, because they're big influences in my book on society's consciousness. We've invited Samah to present on two interconnected Tapatahi demands, justice reforms, and militarization in the Pacific. And you can take that wherever you like to. We're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts, Samah. Kia ora.
Thank you. Thank you, and I'm very honored to speak after the amazing speakers that went before me. I'll keep it short so we can have some time for questions, and these topics like the ones prior are huge. When we're talking about dismantling the justice system, it's very much a long-term goal to abolish the prison industrial complex. Requires us to abolish a lot of other stuff beforehand. It requires us to uplift people out of poverty. It requires us to grow our empathy, to change our entire perspective. So it's going to require all those steps to come first, and that's why I think prison abolition is such a powerful thing to aim for. And yes, as you said, very strongly linked with militarization. And what I kind of want to give my time to speak to is more about the colonial worldview that we have, because that's the source of all of the problems that we've been discussing today. We still see ourselves as a colony distant from Mother Britain. We very much see ourselves as, you know, and we say it, you know, we say that our values align with the United States. You know, what does that mean? And we see ourselves as part of that collective when really, you look at us geographically, you look at the whakapapa of this whenua, we are clearly part of the collective of the islands in the sea of the Pacific. And so what does that mean that we align with these superpowers, but then we're in close proximity to these Pacific islands? That's a real danger to them. And we saw that recently with the US and Papua New Guinea deal, whereas a few years ago when China was making a security deal in the Pacific, Jacinda Ardern came out very strongly against that. And she said, even if they're not setting up a military base, we should watch that, you know, fair. But then recently with the Papua New Guinea deal that the US made, and Chris Hipkins came out and he was like, oh, just because there's military there, it doesn't mean it's militarization. But you actually ask what people on the ground are saying. They've had massive protests in Papua New Guinea, huge. We haven't heard much about it in our news or any. Huge protests. The people didn't want it. They were very concerned there was going to be a lack of accountability for the military personnel, and also the history of militarization in the Pacific would make anyone concerned about these developments. What New Zealand could do is stand with the people of the Pacific and make a very strong, put a paw in the ground and say, no, we're independent. That does take some courage because we're a strong country. But I think that that's necessary not just for the security of our neighbors, but for our own security, because we'd be naive to think that US military interests don't impact our decisions here locally. And with the prisons, where to even start there? You know, it's so broken. You know, 50% of people go back into prison. It's just, we have the highest rate of incarceration for Indigenous women in the world. For me, that's one of our biggest shames as a country. Terrible, non-violent crimes. Right. And what it is again, it's that continuation of the colonial state trying to uphold their sovereignty, to maintain their sovereignty. That's what militarization is about, and that's what the prison industrial system is about. Because these people, they don't fit into this colonial world. They have fallen through the cracks, the big gaping holes. It doesn't work for them. And what the colonial state wants to do is just hide that. And also punish it, to erode our empathy for those people, so that we no longer see them as people and ask, oh, how did they get here? And we just think, oh, they're criminals. We put them in that box, in that metaphorical but also physical box, where they are out of sight and out of mind. And that's very much the same with war zones. They are zones that are out of our minds. We don't see them and we don't think about them. They're dark, they're not nice. And what that enables is for the state to basically do whatever they want in those zones. They're like lawless zones, you could think, you know. People's human rights, basic human rights, are being breached in prison. That's basic, you know. We're chucking people in dungeons. We're taking away all of their freedoms. We are abusing them. And it takes a lot of effort to normalize that in society. We didn't just come to accept it. And the prison system started by incarcerating Māori who were resisting the colonial state. And I see it today as continuing that legacy. But what's happened now is that, you know, the colonial state came here. I said I'd keep this quick. And they established this little Britain where the settlers were taking land from Māori and starting to create wealth for themselves through the destruction of that land and through the destruction of Māori society. Eventually, this more and more settlers came, and that land class became a minority. So the colonial state is now colonizing not just Māori, but the majority of people who don't fall into that class. And so when we say that the prison industrial system is racist, absolutely. It's racist in the sense that it's a pattern of actions that cause disproportionate harm to Māori, but it's also just the baseline is that it's oppressive for everyone. And whenever we have a system that's oppressive for everyone, people of oppressed communities are disproportionately impacted. And so when we talk about getting rid of racism in the prison industrial complex, we are actually talking about implementing preventative measures that help uplift people so they don't end up there. And what that would do is uplift everyone, because we're going to have to tackle poverty. We're going to have to tackle homelessness. We're going to have to tackle the minority class that owns the majority of the land. And that for me is a very important note, which is that the colonial state is now colonizing all of us. And that's why the first demand for Tapatahi is recognition of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. Recognition for Te Tiriti o Waitangi means we can start imagining a different way to do things. We can start imagining how we might deal with harm in society that is in a mana enhancing way. We can start thinking about being independent from the warmongers, from the military industrial complex, and simply creating space for something different to exist could be the thing that we all need in order to imagine a different society for all of us. Do I get into a new thing? Or, yeah. I think I'll leave it there because all of my things are deep and long-winded, but yeah. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for having me on this panel.
Thank you. Kia ora, Samah. Look, to be honest, every single one of these things, we could have had just one event like this and just focused on that one thing. So yeah, it's amazing how all of our speakers have crammed so much perspective into their time allocated. So now we're going to move on to our final session. We might run a few minutes over time. Is our panel discussion. We've got a couple of questions here, but we'll probably only have time for the one. So I'm just gonna lay it out quite quickly. So we've talked about, you know, describing the problems. We've had a few suggestions on how to fix things. And of course, beyond the election is really what we're looking to, because elections happen every 3 years, blah, blah, blah. Politicians, they're not going to, you know, we can't rely on them without some kind of counterforce. Do I remember that term, counterforce, being made against these inept, impotent politicians and so on. So the question is, and the focus is around critical solution building. What advice can you offer our speakers today? What advice can you offer about where we should go to from here to leverage that transformational action? And if we could, we've touched on the interconnectedness of all of these issues. A lot of people get overwhelmed. It's like, there's so much to do. I just don't know where to start. And Arama, you said, I think it was you said, you got to meet people where they are, right? This seems common sense, but it can't be common sense, because if it was so common, we'd all be doing it already. So what is it that we've been missing? What's the piece of the puzzle? How can we do things differently? You know, that thing about if you do the same things over and over again, expecting different results, you're crazy. Are we crazy? What's going on? So what advice could you give to all the good people listening here about activism and how to take it to that next level? Big question. And also, if we have any thoughts, you know, in Ōtautahi and Porirua, Mike and John, happy to hear your thoughts. Perhaps we'll start over in Ōtautahi, because I can see you on the screen, John. And we've got a couple of minutes each to reply. Kia ora.
Kia ora koutou, thanks for that. Yes, what is to be done? I think, yeah, I think we face this huge problem, and I think I'm being really pleased to hear so much talk about capitalism in this this afternoon, because I think capitalism, we have this clash between capitalism and the planet, and only one can win, and it has to be the planet, of course. So we really have to be realistic about tackling capitalism, and that's an enormous task, and it can't be done because you know, people with wealth and power have enormous influence over the information that comes out to us all the time through our newspapers and what have you. But look, I'll just say a few things that I think they're very simple things. But the first is that it's important for people to work in groups and work with other people. If you're working by yourself, you can have the impact of one person. If you're working in a group of 5 people, you can have the impact of 100 people. If you're working in 3 or 4 groups together, then you can have the impact of many hundreds, many thousands of people. So what we need to do is, don't be by yourself, be in a group. And don't feel that you have to be in every group working on all of these issues, because essentially what we have to do is build a movement, right? So we shouldn't feel that our role is to go out and recruit people to this movement and get their names on a bit of paper and get them signed up to whatever. Yes, we have to do that, but that shouldn't be the main goal. The main goal is to think of ourselves as part of a movement. So the organizations we are already involved in, think of yourselves as part of a broader movement, and being prepared to support other groups that are doing things. Like if there's a particular thing going on, everybody comes in and supports it, you know? So think about movement building rather than organization building. And look, to be really frank, I think it's going to take civil disobedience action on a mass scale that's going to change things. We just do have to be prepared to put ourselves on the line, to be prepared to break the law and take the consequences for doing that. So that's on a very large scale. And I'm really pleased, like the group Restore Passenger Transport Restore Passenger Rail in Wellington. They've done a fantastic job, and over a series of weeks, keeping this issue on the front pages and being talked about by people in you know, in their smoker rooms and what have you. And the golden rule is, if these issues are being talked about by the general community, then we are winning. If these issues are not being talked about by the general community, we are nowhere. And we need to drive our agenda right into the face of the whole community and engage them. Kia ora.
Oh, kia ora. I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there. I enjoyed Mike's presentation on all the ways in which these fantasies about alternative fuels are not going to get us where we need to be. But we're not going to reach that inflection point. We're not going to be able to have climate change the way we're predicting it if we're all destroyed by nuclear war. We're not even gonna, that's gonna be like the best case scenario if we let the global tensions that are currently escalating daily, if we let that continue on the path that it's on. And a lot of people don't care about geopolitics. A lot of people have everyday concerns that take up most of their attention. But for those who are paying attention, the people in control over in the US, which is the weapons manufacturers, are very intent on building war with China. And we haven't had a war between superpowers since the 1940s. So this is just so catastrophically bad. I don't know if people have been paying attention, but there's this real normalization of nuclear weapons again. And, you know, we often talk about like, oh, I'm so inspired by the youth. I'm so inspired by our older people because they knew what the fuck was up when it comes to nuclear free. But there's been a lot of erosion since those really powerful movements around the time again that I was born. And now I'm like, I saw a documentary the other day. Did anyone here know that Tim Shadbolt was more radical than you? Did you know that? I didn't. I thought he was just this, like, you know, I'm sure people here. I mean, I don't know the guy, but yeah, I'm really impressed by those movements. I don't know what's happening. But anyway, all I want to say is that we might not feel as though we have much power to get in the way of these types of tensions. But one thing we can do is right now our government is considering joining AUKUS, which would be our way of participating in the buildup of tensions. It would be our way of condoning nuclear propelled subs. It would be our way of eroding the nuclear non-proliferation treaty by allowing Australia to develop capability with nuclear technology. So this is one issue that we can really get involved with. We can really, all of us should be thinking about how we can stop war with China, how we can stop New Zealand joining AUKUS. So that would be my 2 cents.
Good, Arama. Mike, would you like to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, just so much agree with what Arama's saying, that there are these big threats that we can't ignore, and they're kind of symptoms of what I was talking about. That more resources become harder to get, and there's less energy available. So we're going to be fighting over, there's constitutional problems all over the world with mining these materials, and so conflict is going to become stronger and stronger, and those symptoms that were predicted by limits to growth. So the militarization and the fact that we don't count as a planet their emissions is another bit of our self-delusion where we just pretend that this stuff's not happening. And so yeah, it's a real threat that we have to be aware of.
Thank you, Arama, for touching on things that were on my list as well. You know, AUKUS were part of the Five Eyes, Rocket Lab. They did a launch without telling us. They just launched. But yeah, in terms of the question you're asking, I think we need greater empathy for each other. That's my thing. I think that there is a very strong effort to divide us. Very strong, left, right, and we're just get more entrenched in our echo chambers, then someone has to break that cycle. And if we see ourselves as progressives, if we see ourselves as people who care about morals, then I think it should be us who breaks that cycle, us who reaches across to meet people where they're at, people that we strongly disagree with, because ultimately they're our neighbors. They are people that we live with and have to share a community with, whether we like it or not. And so the sooner we come to terms with that, and the fact that we still have more in common with them than the wealthy elites who are destroying our planet and waging a war on the poor, the sooner we can work together to at least achieve some baselines that we can all agree on. That's my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Kia ora, and kia ora to all the speakers. It's been amazing to hear from you all, and it's incredible how much has been covered. And this last question is so huge. I've spent my life trying to answer that question, and I think those of us, there are people in this room who are in my generation, like, and John Minto too, we've spent our lives trying to answer that question. And I often think that it's in that attempt to answer, we rehearse, as John Lennon I think said, we're rehearsing real life, but actually in our actions to make change, we are trying to demonstrate the world we're trying to create. The biggest problem I continue to see at the moment is that you talked about we, but there is no we. Efforts like Tapatahi, I totally talk what you're trying to do here, because you are trying to start to create a we, but I have no base, I have no movement, I have no group at the moment. There is no base that I act from politically. And so I just see this, and I know a lot of other people in my networks that are like that. We talk on all these issues. We could choose and do choose to support particular issues, but there's no collective base like a political party or political organisation that we can act from, having been through, some of us through several parties of the left, but those no longer represent the kaupapa of people, of all of us here actually, as far as I can identify. I mean, I look at Mike Joy and think, boy, what if there was an eco-socialist party where Mike Joy was the environmental spokesperson? What if there is an organisation where John Minto was the one on housing, and so on and so on, justice, international relations, the rest of it. I'd still love to do housing and welfare and jobs, but if there was a place, and we can talk about going out and reaching out to people across the lines, and that's beautiful, but unless there's a base from which we can do that, and ways in which we can involve other people to build mass movements, we are not going to build the power that we need to expose, oppose, and end capitalism and colonialism. Kia ora whānau.
Kia ora, kia ora. Man, well, I don't know about you all, but I'm pretty inspired to take the next step and do something after this event, get together, mindstorm, heartstorm, all of that. Yeah, so again, a big thank you to all of our speakers, and I want to say to all of our techie organising people in each hub behind the scenes, because you've been working your little hearts out to get this thing together. I don't know if you guys want to take a screenshot of or be on the video right now. Can we do that all together? Because it'd be really nice to be able to. And thank you to everyone in every hub who showed up. Yeah, like these guys. Hello. Yeah, you're great. You're awesome. And those guys. Whoop 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 whoop. Hey man, good turnout. Oh my gosh. So yeah, thanks to everyone again. So yeah, just wanted to consolidate. Tapatahi is all about, we're realizing all these disparate groups are doing all your stuff, and it's good work, but we just haven't that holy grail of coming together. When can we do it? Let's do it. That's what I reckon. So thanks again. I'll just close us out with a karakia. I'm not sure, I'm just checking in with my other hubs if there was anyone there who was burning to close us out with our karakia, or I'll just go ahead. Sure, I'll just go ahead. Yeah, okay. Arahina, Arahina e te ahatua, tiakina, tiakina, tiakina e te ahatua, arohaina, arohaina. Arohaina e te ahatua. Tuturu whakamaua ki a tīna, tīna. Haumi e hui e, tae ki e. Kia ora everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.